The Simanat Tava, a new year, a new cycle. Welcome to another edition of our Thursday night's class. I don't know who's sponsored tonight, but whoever it is lucky night because it's a very holy, special night. Tonight's the yahrzeit of many tzaddikim, amongst them two from one era, one from a later era. The one from the later era I knew personally, but first, tonight's the yahrzeit of Levi Yitzchak ben Sarah Sashemi Barditchev, the Heilige Barditchev, Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh L'Vachas Chutei Yagen Aleinu V'Kol Yisrael, Amen. Tonight, tomorrow. Tonight is also the yahrzeit of the Holy Chatam Sofer, Zecher Tzadik L'Vachas Chutei Yagen Aleinu, from Gdolei HaPoskim of Jewish history. And many, many, many years later, just recently, passed away a rabbi that was the Rosh Shiva of Chubin, who I learned with Chavruta for many years. His name was Rabbi Avram Genachovsky, Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh L'Vacha, very unique man. Briefly, he was also my Sadek Kiddushin. Now I should really talk about the others first, just because of chronicle order, but this one I knew personally, so I'm going to start here even though it's backwards. Rabbi Avram was a legend. There's no way to explain. He didn't really belong in this generation, that's for sure. He was the Chubin Rav's son-in-law, Bezivug Sheni. That means Chubin Rav after the war got remarried, and the woman who he remarried had a daughter, and he married that daughter. So he was the son-in-law through that. And that's how he became later on the Rosh Shiva of Chubin. He was one of the greatest Geonim, the greatest geniuses that we had in our generation. When he was 15 years old, the Chazon Ish already stood up for him. The Chazon Ish didn't stand up for anybody. When he was 15 years old, the Chazon Ish stood up for him. I don't know if anybody knows of anybody else that the Chazon Ish stood up for. And if there are, it's a handful. This is something there's no way to explain. It's actually the Chazon Ish was the one who caused him to be a Talmid Chacham. His father was a politician. He was Shomer Shabbat, but traditional Jew will call it. And the aspirations weren't that the young genius should be a Talmid Chacham. It was more in the direction of a chess player. But then they lived in Bnei Brak area. Bnei Brak wasn't what it is today, a black cat center. And he heard the Chazon Ish was a big genius, and whatever. He went to visit the Chazon Ish as a young child. Chazon Ish right away picked up that he's a very smart boy and he has a lot of potential. And he told him, Avram, don't waste your time, go to yeshiva. Back then when the Chazon Ish said something, that was it. There was no ifs, ands, and buts. So he went home and he told his parents, and even though his parents weren't religious, or Orthodox at least, they immediately understood, if the Chazon Ish said, that's what we do. And they put him into a good yeshiva, and from there he became the Gaon Ulam he became. But geniuses in Torah, we had many. And we still have in our generation many. Today the young kids that know, there's no way to describe the amounts of knowledge that they know. I have relatives, including a younger brother. Well, I'm pretty convinced that if you were to put him against one of these computer softwares in knowledge of Torah, he would know more than Otzar HaChochma or Bar Ilan or all those softwares. Live, simultaneously. No, Kol HaTorah Kula by heart like nothing. We have many of those today. Hashem blessed us with a generation of young kids that are geniuses that sit and learn and they have photographic memory and they really know a lot. But to be also a Talmid Chacham, and also a Baal Midot, and also a Baal Chesed, and also you have Yirat Shamayim, and also, that already, I don't know if we have. But Avram was one of those. Besides for being a Gaon Olam that there's no way to explain in Torah, he was a Gaon in Chesed and in Midot. His character traits know no boundaries. The biggest proof is he agreed to learn with me. I was a young, troubled teenager. Why would he waste his time spending a couple hours a night learning with me? But I guess he saw something, that maybe one day I'll do something with it. And he agreed. By the time he would learn with me, he was so drained from his day, so you understand the extent of what it means, a person who has sacrificed to spread Torah. I used to go to where he stayed. He lived in Bnei Brak, but Shabin Yeshiva is in Jerusalem, so I used to stay all week in Jerusalem. I used to go to his dorm room. He lived in a dormitory together with the boys in Shabin Yeshiva in Jerusalem. And I'd go into his room. It was late at night. That's when we would start learning. And he'd lay on his bed because he was too weak to even sit. It reminded me of the stories of the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish used to collapse because every last ounce of energy he used for learning. And sometimes he would apologize in the middle and stop for like a minute or 2 minutes and take a few bites or drink a sip of coffee or something because he had no energy in him. And like this, we would learn for a couple of hours. And when he ran out of energy completely, he would say, okay, now I think you should go. And this went on for a long time. A bunch of years later, I was already back in the United States and engaged to get married. And I had a couple of Rashi Yeshivot throughout the years when I was in the US. And I wasn't sure what's the right thing to do, which Rosh Yeshiva to give it to. The Tavim Sadek Kiddushin. So a friend told me, I have a solution, import one from Israel, and then it's not this, not that, and Israeli, everybody understands. So I called Rabbi Avon Genachovsky and I told him, Rabbi, would you come to marry me off? So I said, what's the date of the wedding? So I told him. So he said, there's a little bit of a problem. So I said, what's the problem? He said, can we make the chuppah during the day? So I said, if you're going to come, you say what time you want the wedding. That's what's happening. So he set a time. I said, done. He said, okay, so I'm going to come. So I said, but wait, you said there's a problem. What's the problem? So he said, I'll tell you later on. All right. He's not arguing. I'm not there. We bought him a ticket and he came. I later on found out what the story was. I actually found this out when I flew in Motzei Sukkot, when I found out he passed away. The day after Sukkot to do Nichum Avelim to his wife. His wife told me by the Shiva, let me tell you what happened with my husband. My husband doesn't go to the United States. He only went when he had a child that died when he was alive, so he was here for a while in hospitals with him. Besides that, he doesn't leave Israel, because he doesn't go to sleep outside of Israel. He doesn't sleep outside of Israel. So he made a calculation, how many hours could he stay awake straight? So if the chuppah was by day, so he could take a night flight, land in the morning, do the chuppah, and take a evening flight back to Israel, and it's only 27, 28 hours, so he could be awake the entire time. But if it's going to be at night and he has to take a flight the next day, then it's already too many hours. He can't stay awake straight so many hours. So that's why he asked if the chuppah could be at that time. How many of us know somebody that would be willing to stay awake without getting any return, any charge, any gift? He never accepted money. We had a kollel in Israel, it still exists, but then he was the Rosh Kollel. 17 years he was the Rosh Kollel. Every month he would get an envelope and every month he would send it back. He never agreed to accept a thing. That's the difference between rabbis then and rabbis in 2021, soon 22. Today, lo aleinu in America, if they don't get an envelope, they don't come. He, for 17 years straight, day in, day out, taught Torah. At the end of every month, would get an envelope. At the beginning, we would give him checks. He would rip them up. So then we thought we'd be smart. We'd give him cash. So he came back to drop it off. We'd just make him. And he would always say, "You're just wasting my time. I have to go out of my way to bring it back. I don't take money for teaching Torah. It's out of the question." That's why he was an Adam Gadol. He didn't turn the Torah into a commercialized industry. It's an amazing thing. And then he was a Gaon in Midot, character traits, and that's the number one thing that God tests a person on. People think you could be holy because you pray a lot and you this, yeah. I don't know. It doesn't sound holy to me. I know people from other religions that pray a lot too. In order to be a righteous person, the first contingency is to have flawless character traits. And Avram was the example of one who had flawless character traits. And here's just one of the many incidents that I know about. There's countless incidents. There's 3 big fat volumes, looks like an encyclopedia, called Agan Asar, where over there people write about themselves, different incidents that they had with him, and there are countless more. There's no end. He had a chavruta, a guy. Today that guy is a very famous rabbi in Israel, and he had many chavrutot, many study partners, because people would ask him to learn. He always felt bad saying no, so he would agree, but he didn't have time, so he would find time, and sometimes learning would have meant 10 minutes on Shabbat afternoon every second week or whatever, but that was good enough. You felt good. You had a connection to such a great man. So he had this one chavruta that he used to learn with every week, Friday night, after the meal for a couple hours. This guy used to go to walk. He lived in Bnei Brak. He would be back in Bnei Brak for the weekends. He would walk over to his house Friday night after the meal, and he would show up. One week, this boy who learns with him, again, I'm telling you, I know the guy personally, he just doesn't agree for some reason to say his name. He's one of the famous rabbis that you all respect in Israel today. Then he was still a single boy, came to his house Friday night, and I guess he didn't pay attention, he didn't realize whatever it was, he accidentally, instead of knocking on the door, rang the bell. And here he's about to go into the Gedol Hador's house, Friday night, and he rang the bell. In Hebrew we say, fadichot, it's embarrassing. So he didn't know what to do with himself. He was going to bury himself. But then he said, listen, there's no reason to dodge it. Rabbi Avram's not stupid. He knows I come every Friday night at this time or whatever. It is what it is. I made a mistake. People make mistakes. So he stood by the door. Normally within a second, the Rebbetzin or Rabbi Avam would answer. That week, nobody answers the door. After like 5 minutes, he knocks. Still nobody answers. Knocks again. Still nobody answers. And he's getting frustrated. Finally, after like 15 minutes, Rabbi Avam answers the door in pajamas. And he tells him, I'm so sorry, I forgot you were coming tonight, I fell asleep and that, it's good you didn't give up, and you kept on knocking, otherwise I would have never woke up. Come in. Meaning, Avram was sitting by his dining room table in the middle of the meal, had everybody get out of there quietly through the back door, went into his room, changed into pajamas, made a whole, just that this guy should be able to lie to himself if he wants to, that he didn't hear that he rang the bell in his house on Friday night, so he shouldn't feel embarrassed. That's called an Adam Gadol. That's a great man. Not just somebody who thinks he's holy because of some illusion or the other. And like this, there are countless incidents. I don't even know how to explain. One night when I was learning with him, this just comes to mind now. We were learning, we got done, it was like 3:15 a.m. And he asked me where I'm going. So I told him, honestly, I was thinking of going to Arnof before I go back to Beit Vagan because I'm hungry. He said, there's only one place open. Then, today Jerusalem was very different. Then there was only one place open 24 hours in Old Jerusalem. It was called the Angel Bakery in Arnof. I said, so maybe I'll stop in the Angel Bakery and then I'll go back to Beit Vagan. But I told him, but there's no buses. I don't have enough money for cabs tonight. And I don't know, we'll see how the hitching goes. You know, if I get a hitch quickly, good. If not, then I'll just go straight to Beit Vagan. Sure enough, I went out of yeshiva. There was nobody. There was no cars. I finally conceded that I have to take a cab. But to make an extra stop on the way was money I didn't have at that point in my life. So I went straight back to my dormitory. At about 4 o'clock, 4 or 4:10 in the morning, there's a knock on my dorm room. Rabbi Avrom's there. I'm like, Rabbi, what are you doing here? Like, to put this into your mind, just because you don't know who Rabbi Avrom is, imagine you were sleeping at night, somebody knocks on your bedroom door, you open the door, and the Baba Sali's there. Pass out, no? What are you doing here? And I said, Rabbi, what are you doing? He said, I figured you couldn't make it to Angel Bakery, so here, I bought you some food. So a yeshiva boy shouldn't be going to sleep hungry. Gdol Ador, the whole Klal Yisrael is on him. He teaches thousands of students. His sefer called Baal Al-Mogim, for example, on Masechet Brachot, you could sit tens of hours to understand one line. Not one page, one line. But all that geonut, he found it, he knew that this yeshiva boy doesn't have money, and if he offers me money, I'm going to be embarrassed to take it, so it won't work. So he's going to let me go back to my dorm, and then he's going to go to the bakery himself, buy food, bring it, drop it off. I wasn't his nephew, his grandson. I was just a troubled teen that went and said, Rabbi, I want to learn with you. That's where it started and ended our relationship. And these are great people. So his yard sites tonight. He loved Am Yisrael a lot. I'm sure he has a lot of power in heaven. I will tell you something wild. The Gemara, I'm sorry for the term, but I don't have a better term. The Gemara says about Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, that after he passed away, he used to come back to his house Friday night to make Kiddush. By the first year Yodzeit, after he passed away, I was in Israel. I went to be with his wife. And his wife told me, he died young of cancer, pancreas cancer. Only on Sonei Yisrael. His wife told me, so I said, a whole year went by, and that, I was trying to feel her out, to gauge what's going on, and if she needs help with anything. She says, Baruch Hashem, it's a lot easier than I thought. That already sounded weird. She was an Eshet Chaver, the wife of a Talmid Chacham, who gave her life for him. Easier, if anything, it should be harder than you thought. So I said, I'm I was stuttering because I didn't really know how you respond to that. I was kind of like, I'm happy to hear, I guess. I wasn't sure what you say. And he said, my husband comes back to the house every Friday night to make Kiddush for us. There's a man who lived in our generation. Hashem let him come back. I said, is that in a dream? She said, no, he comes. And she was a very normal, rational woman. She didn't have hallucinations. Well, she didn't take psychedelics. So we don't have to suspect that anything was going on. She was very grounded to reality. She says, my husband comes back every week to make Kiddush for us. So it's not so hard. Not normal. It's really not normal. In the past 500 years, I don't know if there's any story about any Adam Gadol or such a thing. There's no way to explain it. But yeah, these were the tzaddikim. This is how they grew. It's interesting that he passed away exactly on the day of the Bardit Shuvah, because there was a lot of common ground there. They were both eternal optimists. The Bardit Shuvah was the ultimate optimist of Jewish literature, right? If you study all Jewish literature, the rabbi that the most optimism is written from and about is Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Bardit Shuvah. Rabbi Avraham went in his footsteps, very much so. He was also the eternal optimist. He turned the worst situations into something positive. I don't know, he always had a way to figure out what's beautiful about life. Life is always beautiful. And even when parents came to him to cry to them with their problems, and some of them seemed to be very severe, he still had a way to twist it to something good. It was an unbelievable thing. So let's talk about the Bardit Shuvah a little bit. And maybe we could get something out of this for life. If God came to the room and offered everybody just one wish, that's not so far-fetched. He offers you a lot more than that every day. You just may not hear him offering it to you, and you may not care to respond. But the Gemara says that every morning a bat kol yatzet mechorev, and says a list of things. Amongst them, he offers you what you want. But I'm going to keep it to one. If God came down to the room right now and offered everybody, just pick one wish. I am not such a gambler, but if I had to bet, I would put my money on 100% of normal mankind. And I stress normal because, yes, there are people that consider themselves progressives. They don't fit in the criteria of normal. But normal mankind would all pick one wish: to be happy. That's the only thing that's important. Because if you're happy, you got everything. If you're not happy, you got nothing. You could have everything in the world, and it's all worthless if you're not happy. And you could have literally nothing, nobody should ever know what that means, and feel like the greatest ever, because you're happy. Over my years of traveling the world, I've seen it firsthand. I had the merit to interact with the rich and the poor, the powerful and the weak, the upper class, the middle class, first world countries, second world countries, third world countries, every area, every scala, and I've clearly seen it. I've seen celebrities that make upwards of $1 million for singing for 20 minutes, spending hours crying to me about how much they hate their life. Some of them that you probably know just because their life ended up in overdoses on drugs and other things. And on the flip side, paupers living in Africa and in other places in the world that I've been that have nothing. They don't even know where they're going to have water from, and they're happy. Not just happy to the point that I envied them, that I couldn't understand. How's this possible? I want to be like this. And then I realized that happiness is not something that you can find. It's something that you have to acquire. And there's only one state that you can buy it in, and that's the state of mind. You have to choose to put yourself into a state of mind that you're willing to be happy. And most of us are not even willing to go on the journey to the state of mind to be happy, so we don't even stand a chance to get that far. Because there's so many obstacles along the way. One of the many obstacles is instinctively humans are negative creatures. Why can be argued. If you believe in Freud's nonsense, so it's very simple why. But because you're just a self-centered lunatic. But if you believe that God created man, so by default you can't believe in Freud's nonsense. So I say that very easily. And if anybody wants to have the scientific argument on Freud's stupidity, I'm willing to do that in writing only. So you're welcome to write, and I'll respond to anything you want. But by definition, you can't be a mammal that has instincts with no free choice if there's a God. It's one or the other. It's just a simple equation. It doesn't take much to understand. But I'm not here to explain why people naturally are negative, but there can be many explanations. Youngsters normally relate to the fact that they've had so much horror in their life, or been disappointed so many times, or got hurt so many times, so as a result, instinctively, that's what they assume is going to happen. And there's a certain rationale to that. It's a statistical pattern in their mind, or in their subconscious mind. And at that moment, we write things off before they start. And we write things off before they start, they can't develop. And then definitely there's no chance to be happy. So those who are eternal optimists are the ones who really succeeded to get to any level of happiness that can be. So if we have to eliminate the negativity, then we have to be able to twist things, not in an irrational way, in a very rational way, in our minds, to see the good in everything versus the bad, in order to stand a chance to get to an existence which is a happier place. So when we talk about Yitzchak and Berditchev, it's the easiest to say because, there's countless stories that all of us learned at one stage or the other in our lives. And the majority of them we mentioned in classes over the years. We'll just give some of the more famous examples of how he literally saw only the good in everybody, unconditionally, no matter what. And everybody's not only people and everything. All occurrences he saw good in. Somebody asked me, what good would I find in the fact that tomorrow by 5 p.m. most people in New York City might lose their job unless they get vaccinated. Now, I do want to stress I am very pro getting vaccinated, so nobody should get any wrong ideas. And I did it myself. I lead by example. But that has nothing to do with it. I'm also very against forcing people to do things, because the day the government forces you to take a shot, tomorrow they can force you to wear a yellow star like 1939. There's no end. And that's why government is not allowed to have power, and when they do get power, it has to be stopped. Democracy is the last thing the United States has been, definitely in the past 2 years, but it can be argued for a very long time already. But one way or the other, so they asked me what optimism can I see in this insanity? So I said, I see a lot of optimism actually. I said, people were very confused. We had a president who for Israel was great, for the economy was great, for everything else was maybe not so good. That's a matter of opinion. Donald Trump. And he ran things very unconventionally. Caused a lot of ruckus, chaos, whatever, till today he thinks he's president. Yeah, whatever, he's entitled to. I'm entitled to think I'm a monkey, Everybody's entitled to think whatever they want. I have no objection to that, by the way. And I think as Jews, we owe him a great amount of gratitude. He did unbelievable things for the Jewish nation at large, specifically for Israel. But then, I'm not here to argue if there was or wasn't voter fraud, because I simply don't know. But one way or the other, God decided he's not going to be the next president. And instead we got some sort of, I don't know how to describe it, I guess some doll that hopefully doesn't say anything, and when he does, it doesn't look so good. And some other vice president that's MIA thanks to some disaster going on by the border. That's roughly what's going on. I think even Democrats will agree to that, by the way. Just look up the latest approval ratings and you see that they do. It doesn't take much to understand that. So then people turn to the lower levels of government, hoping that maybe over there we'll find some sanity. And there were some role models like the governor of Florida, which should be mentioned to the good. One of the few people left in the United States that believes in true freedom. And then came the dictators of New York in the past 2 years and made our lives very miserable. The problem is there were still a few crazy progressives that were holding on to this movement. Whether it was in the name of Black Lives Matter or in the name of, I don't know what else, Mask Up or whatever stupidity they had in their head. The underlying thing was really legalized drugs. That was the punchline. And let us just steal money because we don't want to work. But they covered up for it. And they were pro this movement for a while. And it was very hard to reason with them because you can't reason with somebody who's high. And there is no reasoning at that point. And you can't reason with somebody who feels entitled, which is a much worse illness than being high. I'd rather an addict than somebody who has a feeling of entitlement. And you can't reason with somebody who's lazy. Why should somebody go to work if we give them free handouts every month? Or every week or bi-week, or I don't know, thank God, never got any of them, so I have no idea. And at that point, there was still a certain amount of confusion. Now this confusion primarily wasn't by the dummies. It was actually in the elite schools. I tour to speak on campuses. And I see it. It's in the best, amongst the best, the biggest brains. And there was confusion. This vaccine mandate suddenly brought clarity to what dictators are all about. First, evil number one, the governor came toppling down. Should have happened many years ago, but better late than never. And then the mayor, right before he's leaving office, showed his true colors. Yeah, all I am is a tyrant who wants to force people to do things without giving them their own free choice on their own body. I'm not going to let you choose on your body what you should or shouldn't do. Now again, I stress, this is coming from somebody who openly goes to advocate for people to go get vaccinated. It's not like I'm an anti-vaxxer and believe in conspiracies and whatever else. Opposite extreme, grounded to straight science and make my living in big pharma. I'm one of the bad guys. But still, you can't force somebody to do what they don't want. And that's God giving a gift to society, to give them the last chance This is your lifeline. You want to hold on and realize that these people are crazy and walk away before it's too late, or do you want to get sucked in forever? And hopefully, I think tomorrow will be the big day that a lot of people will take a turn. We already see the trend on social media turning away from all this insanity and people starting to realize that old values might have been better after all. But hopefully it'll expand in a much greater way as a result of this. And the Barditcheva in every area in life did this. You know, I think the most famous story, if I had to bet every 3-year-old that went to any Hebrew school knows this, when he walked out of his synagogue one morning and he saw a wagon driver oiling the wheels of his wagon and feeding his horse, wearing a talit and tefillin, not so appropriate after all, right? Most people would get annoyed by that and say, what, come on, a little respect, at least take it off. He didn't see anything bad with that. He thought it was the most beautiful thing. He looks up to heaven and he says, God, look how beautiful your children are. Even at the time that they're busy with their wagons and their horses and that, they still don't want to leave go of their talit and tefillin. They have to hold on to it. Right? That story everybody knows. It was just Sukkot. Very, very famous story about the Barditcheva. Barditcheva insisted on having guests every meal of Sukkot. Good idea, by the way. The Rambam says somebody who doesn't have guests by his table on Sukkot, ki'ilu achal mizivchei meitim, it's as if, God forbid, he ate from idol sacrifices. But he was the big rabbi, so the big rabbi can have any guest he wants. Everybody's dying to go to him. He specifically chose those who were considered the quote-unquote sinners and the homeless and the ill, all the people that were, let's say, in the lower classes in different spectrums of life. And those were his guests for Sukkot. And he would not accept anybody who was considered a respectable quote-unquote guest. Those people weren't allowed in his Sukkah. And that was very interesting. If you believe in accepting everybody, equality, fine, but at least everybody. This was discriminatory to the other way. This was kind of like the racial whatever theory that they try to shove you to learn if you're in the public school system in New York. Some sort of nonsense. So they asked him openly, and they said, why did you do this? And he answered, he said, one day I'm going to have to face God in Beit Din Shamala, and he's going to ask me, what do I want? And I'm going to say, I want to come into Gan Eden. Gan Eden in the terms of Chazal is considered a sukkah. It's considered a sukkah for a long list of reasons. Amongst them, one of the ideas of Gan Eden is it's our first eternal encounter with our forefathers, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, which are part of the Ushbizin and come to our sukkah. It says, and God's going to come to me and say, Levi Yitzchak, hey, who do you think you are? What do you believe? You don't belong in Gan Eden. Today everybody's convinced they're going straight to paradise automatically. Levi Yitzchak Barditchev, the holy man, he wasn't so convinced. He said, so I'm going to tell God, you're right. Maybe I don't deserve it. But life works tit for tat. Midah keneged midah. And in my sukkah, I took all the people that nobody else wanted to take. So even though maybe I don't deserve to be here, you got to take me too. That was the outlook of somebody who just saw beauty in anything and everybody. He says an unbelievable chidush. If it wasn't said by him, honestly, I don't know if you'd be allowed to say such a thing. The Gemara learns many things b'gzeirat shava. That means we take a word or a pasuk or a verse, depending on the situation, a few words, and we find another one that has the same context or the same letters, or depending on situations, and we learn one thing from the other because they have something in common. Sukkot and Pesach, for example, Tedvav, it's a common thing that we learn one from the other. Then there are many. The whole Gemara is based on this. Levi Yitzchak Barditchev made his own Gzeirah Shava. Now, that's why I said, if it wasn't him, you weren't allowed to do things like this. And this is what he writes. There's a mitzvah in the Torah, which is one of the most important, I guess you can say, mitzvot, or one of the most fundamental mitzvot. It's not important, they're all important, but one of the most fundamental mitzvot in the Torah. It's called V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, to love God. He said there's another time that it says V'ahavta. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love your neighbor like you love yourself. Meaning love your friend, the other like you love yourself. Now in V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, in the mitzvah of loving God, the pasuk continues, B'chol levavcha u'chol nafshecha u'chol ma'odecha. You have to love God, and the Gemara learns out of Masachet Brachot. B'chol levavcha, with the Yetzer HaTov and the Yetzer Hara, B'chol nafshecha, afilu notel lishmatcha, even if it's at the cost of your life, u'v'chol ma'odecha, and even if it's at the sacrifice of your entire fortune. So Levi Yitzchak said, being that this says V'ahavta and this says V'ahavta, then a person's obligated to learn to teach himself to love his friend, to love another person, under the same criteria as b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol modecha, with the ultimate sacrifice. There's nothing that should ever get between a friendship. It's an unbelievable thing. If you think about it, this pshat is mind-boggling. And it's so befitting for the man who loved every single person and unconditionally loved every single person. There was nothing to talk about. Part of his love towards humanity came from a great sense of humility. Once he was asked if he thinks the world is a good place or not. I don't know if that's a wise question to ask people today, because I don't want to know what they would have to answer. I once tried one of these online polls with this, and the result kind of horrified me. But in a normal place, and people that are a little more optimistic, so I think naturally we would, even if we don't mean it, we would say, yeah, the world is good. So he said, I don't think the world is good. I think the world's amazing. It's unreal. And I said, what, you have any evidence to your case? What are you backing it based on? Is that an instinct, an emotion? He said, no, it's very simple. If the world is willing to tolerate somebody as low as me, so it must be an amazing place. That's one of the greatest legendary rabbis of history saying about himself. And his sense of humility knew no boundaries. And it's very befitting to something he writes in his writings, that if not for the fact that the Torah discusses the sin of being an arrogant person, he wouldn't believe that it's possible to be arrogant. He would think it's humanly impossible. How can somebody be arrogant? It doesn't make any sense. He says only because the Torah specifically says that there is such a thing. That's why he believes that there is such a possibility. But otherwise he wouldn't even believe there's such a possibility of midat kava. It's an unbelievable thing. And now I want to go to a pshat, that this is really the theme of my class in the Torah element of it. I have other things to say, I always have what to say about everything. Unfortunately, too much. I get myself into a lot of trouble. But it's fun to be the target online for anti-Semitic acts and hate and whatever else. It's kind of interesting. Just for talking your mind. But I mean, it's obviously saying the truth, because otherwise nobody would care. They just ignore. Truth hurts. But here's a theme. I'm going to tell you a chidush from Chaim Shmulevitz, and then we'll go back to the Barditchever, to the way he explained parashiyot in the Torah that are coming up, and we'll put it all together, and we'll try to come out with a puzzle. And you could like it or not. I'm just quoting for great rabbis. You want to take it up with them. I'm just the middleman over here. Chaim Shmulevitz is an unbelievable pshat. There's an interesting discussion in the therapeutic world about educational methods. The greatest element of this discussion is, do we have to put boundaries for people? Or should people create their own boundaries? Because they have common sense, and we shouldn't just humiliate everybody by saying that they don't have that common sense. And this is not non-discriminatory to age, race, education, or anything else. Everybody's included in this question. So, if any of you ever stepped into a therapist's office by mistake, then I'm sure you heard the word boundaries many times. By mistake wasn't a slip of a tongue. And if you went into a psychologist's office or a psychiatrist's office, then forget about it. You signed your life away to boundaries. That's for sure. That goes beyond boundary. The commitment there suddenly has no boundary. I wish there was a boundary on what these people can charge. They shouldn't only speak boundaries, they should live boundaries a little bit. It would be a nice thing. I believe in practicing what you preach. If they're values, you should be the one who leads by design. But anyway, yeah, now I just picked a fight with whatever amount of viewers I have. One way or the other. When we have a young child, he's my child, your child. You're raising him. And, kids act up. That's just what they do. Quite frankly, if a kid doesn't act up, then I might consider putting him into a therapist's office. Because then something's wrong. If a kid acts up, that means he's normal. If he doesn't act up, there's a problem. We got it all warped. We think it's the other way around. That's wrong. A classic example, somebody went to one of the previous Ger Rebbes and said he wants a blessing for his daughter. So, and he said, what's the blessing? He said, my daughter's crazy. I need a blessing. She's crazy. I need a blessing. She should be normal. They said, what makes your daughter crazy? The Rebbe's so sharp. They didn't play around. He'd come with accusations, back them. So he said, by day she eats pigs, and at night she dances with guys. Meant to say she doesn't keep Torah. She eats chazer by day. Huh? So the Rebbe said, I'm sorry, no blessing, get out of here. So he said, why not? Give a blessing for my daughter. He said, because she's not crazy, I have nothing to bless her for. He said, if you would have told me that by day she eats guys and at night she dances with pigs, then she's crazy. But being that by day she eats pigs and at night she dances with guys, she's normal, she has to eat her. Thank God, she's alive, she's all right. Hashem shall help, one day she'll grow out of it, she'll grow up like everybody else. A little bit of how we should look at things in a healthy way. But anyway, Chaim Shmulevitz says that for years there's been an argument, should we impose on kids things? Tell them this is the way it is in my house, we have to do it this way. Or our mother did this, or our father did this, or what. And if you want, I can give you all the nice psukim, Sha'alav vicha v'yagidcha. I don't think you'll outsmart me with all these things. So Chaim says a chidush, and this chidush hurts. Because the truth, and the truth always hurts. The Gemara says, Masachet Sanhedrin Tzadik Daled, that there was a great man, his name was Chizkiyahu HaMelech. I'm sure you remember we once gave a class about a different element of Chizkiyahu HaMelech when the prophet came to him and told him he's going to die, Tzav lebeitcha, because he's going to die because he didn't want to get married. But anyway, so Chizkiyahu HaMelech was praised in that Gemara. What was he praised for? And the Gemara Sanhedrin Tzadik Daled, that he taught Torah and Am Yisrael in such a great way that they checked from Dan until Beersheba, that means in the entire Israel, and they couldn't find any Amaretz. There was nobody who was ignorant. Everybody knew the entire Torah. But any Amaretz wasn't just any adult male who had to learn Torah and whatever. They couldn't find a tinok or tinoket, even a young infant, that didn't know, or a man, a woman, doesn't make a difference, that didn't know all the ilchot tumah v'tahara, some of the hardest halachot to ever learn. Unbelievable thing. Meaning this is the person who accomplished spreading the most Torah in the history of the Jewish nation. There's nobody else in the entire Talmud that it says that in his times there wasn't even a child who didn't know Ilchot Tumah v'Tahara. Everybody knew everything. So is he the master educator? I would say yes, right? It's pretty obvious. The Gemara is complimenting him for it. He's the master educator. Comes Reb Chaim Shmulevitz and says, if he was such a master educator, how could it be that he had a son? And his name of his son was Menashe. And what did Menashe do? He put a tzelem ba'echal, an idol, inside the Kodesh Kodashim, inside the Bet Mikdash. Opposite extreme. This was the master educator, so where did he go wrong with his own child? Is not my question, is Reb Chaim Shmulevitz's question. I think it's pretty obvious, the question on its own. Comes up Chaim Shmulevitz and says, you know why? Because look further in the Gemara. How did Chizkiyahu HaMelech accomplish that everybody should know everything? The Gemara says, Na'atz cherev al petach beit HaMidrash. He took a sword and put it at the door of the learning hall, then a synagogue where they learned Torah was separate places. And he said, Kol mi she'eino osek b'Torah, anybody who doesn't study Torah, yidakel b'cherev, will end up being stabbed with a sword. He didn't mean it literally that he's going to stab them. He meant that this is what your life's going to end up looking like. You may as well be dead. So people were scared. Nobody wanted to live a stupid life, so they all went to learn. And that's why they learned, and they learned, and learned, and learned, and they knew everything, and there was no way to stop them. They were unstoppable. Even a child knew Ilchot Tumah v'Tahara. Comes up Chaim Shmulevitz and says, when you teach a kid through negativity, through force, through intimidation, then your son comes out to be Menashe. He puts a tzelem in the Eichel. Nothing stays from it. For that generation, it looked good. But for the next generation, they were already of Avodah Zarah, nothing lasted. Now, Chas v'Shalom, Chizkiyahu HaMelech, we have to be careful what we say and how we say. I'm just quoting Reb Chaim Shmulevitz. I'm not going past that. There's dangerous territory to walk. We see that this idea is not just one Gemara. This idea has many sources, and that's why Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, I guess, had the courage to say this. For example, the Gemara Brachot Af Chavchet says that Reb Gamliel had a rule Like Kol Talmid she'eino tochok kebaro, any student that his inside and his outside wasn't the same, meaning he didn't practice what he preached, he wasn't allowed him to learn. You want to learn, you got to be real. You don't want to be real, don't learn. I want to pause for a second. I do want to make one comment that may annoy a few people, but all right, won't be the first or the last tonight. Some people give me examples of speakers that have big YouTube followings, and they say, look how many people he made religious. And then I'm curious, what's the guy's skill? And I go onto the YouTube channel and I listen to the speaker for about 30 seconds until I want to puke. And I hear, threats, people are dying and going to hell and this and that and all these crazy insanity. And then they say, no, were you impressed? And I say, no, actually I'm sick. I think you should pay for my doctor bill. I need to get some medicine, anti-nausea medication right now. And they say, what do you mean? But look how many people he's influencing. I said, you might see the few hundred, maybe or maybe not, that he influenced. What about the tens and hundreds of thousands that he destroyed? That saw this nonsense and want nothing to do with God or Judaism ever again. And the raya is from this Gemara from Reb Chaim Shmulevitz. It doesn't work. It causes harm and more harm and more harm, and until we don't concede to it and realize that this has to change, it just simply won't work. There's a reason why Hashem made that Simchat Torah comes after Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. All the Baalei Musar were mechaven to the same biur. Because on Rosh Hashanah and Kippur there's so much fear and sadness and confusion and whatever between judgment and forgiveness and all these emotions. Hashem said, wait a second, there's going to be nothing left to Judaism. So he made a holiday that's 8 days, or in America 9, and said, 7 days are in America, and then the 8th, and then it's 2 holidays technically, right? Shmini Atzeret is a separate holiday. And in America we have that extra day at the end that we call Simchat Torah. And gave one mitzvah, Vayit ach sameach. Be happy. Because if you're a happy person, then maybe something will come out of Rosh Hashanah Kippur. But if you're not happy, it's a waste of time. It's all gone. It's all vanished. To the point that on Shmini Atzeret there's no mitzvot. Sukkot, we go into the Sukkah, we have a lulav, there's something at least. Shmini Atzeret is a holiday that has no mitzvot. The only mitzvah is Nagila v'nismecha bach. Be happy with me, God says. Because that's what's going to work. Hey, listen to the unbelievable chidush from Chatam Sofer's Rebbe. Chatam Sofer's Rebbe was Reb Nosson Adler. Chatam Sofer's Yotzeit tonight, so it's appropriate. Chatam Sofer quotes him Keseder everywhere. Mori v'Rabbi, it's all Reb Nosson Adler. Nosson Adler is buried in Frankfurt, in Germany. So Reb Nosson Adler says like this, the pasuk says in Tehillim, Azorim b'dima brina yiktzor, haloch yelechu v'chon noseh meshach hazara, bo yavo brina noseh alumotav. So he explains the pasukim like this, Azorim b'dima, there's some people that are sad. They cry. They mean it well. Avodas Hashem, a connection with God, but in tears. And there are other people that are happy-go-luckies. Berina iktzoro. They say in Yiddish. Oh, yeah, they're happy. So who's right? So Nosson Adler writes, the one who goes with the way of crying. What he planted, exactly what he did, God will give him credit for that, but that's where it ends. If somebody goes with a happy approach, he will carry the reward of the whole Jewish nation. If your boss comes to you and says, listen, I got 2 positions open right now. One is a cut in your salary and one is a drastic raise. You'll be the highest paid employee in the company. And you chose to get a cut in your salary, I would say you should plead insanity. So God comes and says, listen, you got 2 approaches that you can take to having a relationship with me. One is this fear bully tactic, and the other one is the happy tactic. Here you get a raise, and here you get a downgrade. Pick which one you want. And I leave the rest to your discretion. There's a limit to how much I can spell out. A little bit you have to be able to think on your own. So that was the Chatam Sofer's Rebbe of Nosson Adler. If you want to know how extreme he took it, Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein in his Sefer Aleinu L'Shabeach in Parashat Vayera on the Shmot volume brings down a story that on Shabbat HaGadol, the Chatam Sofer's father, who was the rabbi then, told the Chatam Sofer when he was 9 years old, to give the speech instead of him, to give the speech of Shabbat HaGadol. It's an unbelievable thing. 9-year-old, speak for the whole. Chatam Sofer said, fine. His Rebbe, Reb Nosson Adler, heard that his student, a 9-year-old, is saying the Drasha of Shabbat HaGadol, the most prestigious speech of the year. He said, you got to witness this. This is something that, you got to take pride in a student like that. So he went to witness it. The Chatam Sofer's speech then was based on, he quoted a question from his grandfather on a Rambam in Chot Pesachim, Chot Pesach, and his grandfather left it as Tzarich Iyun Gadol, that he has no answer, and he spent an hour explaining the question and coming up with an answer to explain the Rambam. Otherwise known as, he brought his grandfather's question that his grandfather left at a dead end, and he figured it out. His father felt that that was disrespect to his grandfather. What, do you think he's smarter than him? He couldn't think of this? So he, at the end of his speech, when everybody was wowed away that this 9-year-old went and just did this, he slapped him. One time in his entire life, he hit him once. Rav Nosson Adler saw it. Rav Nosson Adler went over to the father of the Chatam Sofer and told him these words. This is a direct quote. You can look it up in the Sefer. Kimat kibita neiro shel olam. You almost put out the light of the world. This is what Rav Nosson Adler told the Chatam Sofer's father about the Chatam Sofer. You almost put out the light of the world. And then he went to the Chatam Sofer in front of his father and said, Al pi halacha, from today on, you're no longer allowed to speak to your father again. And the Chatam Sofer never spoke to his father again. That was the last time he spoke to his father. Over one time, one negative thing. Unbelievable thing. And if you look at all the Sfarim of Chatam Sofer, Baruch Hashem, some of us went through most of them very well. He quotes his mother many times and his father almost never. Because he wasn't in touch with his father. Kimat kibita neiro shel olam. When you get up on a stage and say something negative, you're about to put out the souls of tens of thousands of Jewish boys and girls. Because they're going to be turned off to anything that has to do with God. Because they can't hear this negativity. And all these people could have been Gdolei Yisrael. So you think, wow, I have some lady somewhere in LA that maybe keeps Shabbat by accident. Because she's scared, because she got intimidated by some story that I said about hell coming back to this world. Idiot. What about the damage that you did to everybody else? What about the tens of thousands that you destroyed? That's the Sitra Achra himself. That's literally the Yetzer Hara itself. In full force. And there's no way to stop these people because they're coming with a God agenda. It's a waste of time. There's no way to stop these people. It's very scary. And this is exactly why before we learn Bereshit and before we start the Torah, we have to, Hashem stuck in all the Hilulot of the Tzaddikim that were the opposite extreme of this, that taught us clearly the approach of seeing positive and speaking positive and seeing positive in everybody, in every situation. So the Gemara says in Brachot, back to what we were saying, that Rav Gamliel didn't allow this, a student into the Beit Midrash if he wasn't a Chok Kibaro. No. The Gemara says when after him they made Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah the Nasi instead of him. Hitrabu safsalei Beit Midrash. The benches of the Beit Midrash multiplied because now everybody was allowed in. Oto hayom, the Gemara says, that day silku, they pushed away the shomer hapetach, to the one who the guard by the door, and they gave permission for all the Talmidim to come in. Shaya Rabbi Gamliel machriz, because Rabbi Gamliel used to announce that any Talmid that ain't Chok Kibaro can't come into the Beit Midrash. Comes the Gemara and says, Ahu Yoma, that day, itosfu kama safsalei, many benches were added into the Beit Midrash because so many new people came to learn. And Rabbi Yochanan says, Pligiba is a machloket between Abba Yosef ben Dosai and Rabbanan. Some say there were 400 benches added in, the others said 700 benches were added in. Yeah, if you learn the Maharal, you understand this is not an argument on numbers, there's a lot deeper things going on here. Havekachalash da'atei de Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel felt chalishut adat. He was saddened. Amar, he said, Dilma chas v'chalila manati Torah mi-Yisrael. Maybe I held back Torah from Am Yisrael. And then the Gemara says, continues the story, that they tried to do something and whatever to show, to put up some act to make him feel better, that he didn't make such a big mistake and whatever. In reality, the Gemara concludes, but that obviously it was a mistake. Meaning we see clearly that the Gemara Masechet Brachot says that even Rav Gamliel himself understood his mistake. They're not accepting everybody's always wrong. If God's eternal and we're a Chedek Elokam Imal, so we're all eternal and we're all equal. And if we think otherwise, then something's very wrong. Then maybe we missed the core of the basic fundamentals of Judaism. The Pasuk says in Shir Hashirim, Smolot tachat roshi v'yeminot chabkeni. Small is left hand, most people are righties, so it's the weaker hand. V'yeminot chabkeni. So in the Torah Hasidut is great lengths on this, and each one in his way. That the B'china of Yimei Adin, Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, was smolo tachat roshi. There is a certain amount of fear, Rosh Hashanah, after all, it's Yom Adin, whatever. Yom Kippur is not, it's a day of love, it's a much different day, but Rosh Hashanah has to it. So that's small. It's like a Yeminot Chabkeini is Sukkot. HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to Am Yisrael on Sukkot and he takes them with a stronger hand, Kaviyachol. He says, come, don't think I pushed you away. You're my children. You're my children unconditionally forever. And no matter what you do, and no matter what it is, it'll always be that way. There is a sefer called Netivot Shalom, the Slonim Rebbe. Over there he writes, why did Hashem make Sukkot end the season of the holidays, right? We have no holidays now except for Chanukah and Purim, which are the Rabbanan, but no Doraita holidays now for 6 months, and Shana Mu'beret this year. So he says, being that during the long nights of the winter, there's a lot of darkness in the world, and people sometimes get sad, they feel lonely, have problems and whatever else. So Hashem said that He's going to make the last holiday the happiest holiday that exists of all the holidays. It's like this, a person has joy to hold on to throughout the months of the winter. His mind will associate with happy things, and that'll keep him going through rough times. It's an unbelievable thing. If you look over there, he says he says it a lot longer than I said. I watered it down drastically. But the concept, that's the concept. Im kenim advarim. So now let's go to another chidush from the Baditshuva. The Baditshuva says an unbelievable thing. It says, the Gemara says, when again, I'm saying things very short just because of time restraints. But when Rabbi Chanidan ben Dosai used to pray for people, so he would put his hands between his knees and he would pray. Natan Rosho ben Birkav. Chazal, we see that a few times, by the way, but that's just one example. He says about that example, so that's why I'm using that. So in Kedushas Levi, the Baditshuva asks, why? Why? I saw people pray like this, like that. I don't know, each one with his motions, but bending down. The Muslims, they bend down, but what's pshat in that? Excuse me. So the Baditshuva says an unbelievable thing. Is there really bad in this world? It's on a shot, it's on the naked eye. Yeah, there's tons of evil. The world's a very evil place. Tyrants, dictators, people that have no ethics. There's no end. But in reality, it's a catch-22. If there's bad in the world, then the world has no meaning, because there can't be a God. And if there's a God in the world, then God is eternal. Eternity doesn't fit with with a lack or a void, and anything that's bad is a lack or a void. So by definition, it simply can't be. Right? So it's a catch-22. If that's the case, so there is no bad in the world. There are times that we think that things aren't good or they don't feel great to us. That's true. And that's called sadness and depression and many other circumstances that people have to go through in life. But ultimately, is there something bad? Now, let's analyze that for a second, a step further. That means somebody today woke up with a headache. Is that good? Doesn't sound exciting to me. I wouldn't want to be that person. I suffered from chronic migraines in my very young years, and it was no fun. Thank God 1,000,000 times over, Hashem shall help forever, that it should never come back. But in a higher understanding of intellect, it feels uncomfortable, but it's not bad. Because if it's God created, by definition, it can't be bad. Now, comes Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Baditshuva in Kedushas Levi and says, so he ran it. Rabbi Chanidan ben Dosai ran into a problem. People would come to him, and let's say somebody walks in and says, Rabbi, pray for me. What? Somebody, lo alenu's not well, sick. Nizu flash lema. So of course he wanted to pray. It's a mitzvah to pray for every Jew. But he had a problem. On his high level, he saw things from a heavenly perspective. And he saw that it's really good for the person, even though it feels uncomfortable right now. Those of you who are in the medical profession, I hope there's somebody in this room at least that is, because it's a very important and very underappreciated profession to be in, but it's an extremely important profession to be in. Anything that benefits people's lives and gets them out of pain in times of need, is a very Jewish profession. And that's what we should focus on. Even if we make a little less money, it's not the end of the world. So when you go into an OR and cut somebody's chest open to do a quadruple bypass, it doesn't look too good, right? If a 5-year-old would see that, they'd first scream, yell, murderers, and then pass out. But in reality, are we doing something bad? No, we're actually saving his life. What's the difference? To a med school graduate who went through the motions and understands what's being done, we understand we're saving a life. But to a layman, it looks very ugly. There's a lot of blood, and it looks like somebody's about to die and is living off some machine temporarily. Meaning, a trained eye understands that not everything that looks bad is actually bad, and an untrained eye sees things for face value. Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa had a trained eye. So when somebody came into him and said, pray for me because I'm going through a hard time, he had a problem praying for him because he had a trained eye. So to him it wasn't a hard time. It was actually in the middle of a surgery. It's the greatest thing ever. Comes the Gemara and says, but he raised himself above that. And he said, despite the fact that I understand that this is the greatest thing that could have happened to him, at the end of the day, he's suffering. So now I have to worry about his suffering. So Natan Rosho Bein Birkav, that's a parable. He put his head in the sand. Meaning he forgot all his heavenly knowledge to be able to feel the other person's pain and to pray for what was important to him. Even though intellectually he knew that there was something greater behind it. Comes the Baditra and says that's the answer why you're allowed to pray for a sick person at all. Otherwise you wouldn't be allowed to. Hashem did it, so obviously he knows what he's doing. And Kol Man David Rachmana L'Tav Avid, everything Kosh Baruch Hu does is for the good. The answer is the same God said, V'aftal Re'acha Kamocha, and V'aftal Re'acha Kamocha means to feel his pain, Imo Anochi B'tzara, and if you feel his pain, it makes no difference all your intellect. At that point, everything goes out the window. You want to get better. And a prayer that comes from the heart like that works, and a prayer not, then I don't know if it works anymore. By the way, we see in Halakha, for example, in Ilchot Avel, Lo Aleinu, nobody should know, but if somebody loses a loved one, it has to sit Shiva. So in Halakha it says that when you go into an Avel, you're not allowed to talk. If they talk to you, so then you can respond, but otherwise not. And there's very little explanation in Halakha why, but years later the Nosei Kelim explained, a few of them, including the Prim Gadim, that one doesn't know what the other person's emotional state really is. Now some people deal with sorrow in a way that they want to be left alone. Other people want to talk about it. Even those who do want to talk about it want to talk about things on their terms, not on your terms. You walk into somebody who just lost his mother that he loved, and you tell him it must be so hard for you. He looks at you and is like, what? You don't even know. You hate your mother. You don't know what it means to have a mother either. You walk into somebody that has a mother that he hated, you say, it must be so hard for you. He's like, what do you want from me? Oh, thank God she's gone. She left a nice insurance policy. You don't know what's going on in the other person's head. You don't know what the other person's feeling. So you have to leave the ball in their court, that they should begin the conversation, and you could follow along with the lead that they give you. That's called being there for somebody else. When you want to be there for yourself, so you dictate the tone in the room. And then you've never benefited anybody in your life, you only caused harm. I remember Avram Ganachovsky once asking me when I came back from a flight. I was in the US for a couple of days and I came back to Israel. I landed, I came, and that night I already came to learn with him. And he asked me how was my flight, and I said very good. And he said, did you fly business or first? And it was weird to me, like, really? Rabbi, I came to learn, this is what's important. So I told him, what do you think, Rabbi? I had to be a wisecrack. That was always me. So I said, if I had to guess, you probably flew first. So I said, yes, that's correct. And then he said, was it comfortable? Did you sleep on the plane? How long did you sleep on the plane? Were they nice to you? How long did it take to get to Jerusalem? I couldn't, at a certain point, I was like, Rabbi, really? I do this all the time, it's not like it's a big deal to me. So he's like, you're saying that, but that's not true. I said, what do you mean that's not true? He said, if you would have flown coach, it would cost you about $1,000. You flew first, it probably cost you upwards of $5,000 or $10,000. If you're willing to spend 10 times the amount, that must be pretty important to you. So if it's important to you, it's important to me. So I'm taking interest in what's important to you. That's part of being a friend. His head was so much in learning that whether you put him in coach, business first, or a private jet, he wouldn't even know where he is. The only thing he saw around him was Dapei Gemara. And beyond that, he knew nothing of this world, and I know that for a fact. There were many times that he ate, and I would ask him, just to feel him out. I said, how was the food? And he said, the mizonot was good. He knew things by its blessing. That's all he knew. He had no idea what he was eating. He would eat bread sometimes from 2-3 weeks ago. It didn't make a difference. He just needed to, there's hamotzi, yeah, okay. That was the extent of what he knew about the world. But to me, it was interesting. And he was the one who decided it was interesting to me, because he went and made that analogy. If you're willing to spend money on it. Somebody once told me that they're not going to compliment people that wear expensive bags or belts or shoes or I don't know what are all these things, because what type of insanity is it to spend so much money on whatever? Honestly, there was a while that I used to think that too. I'm not going to lie to you. I would see people wearing these watches that cost $250,000, $500,000, $1 million on their wrist. I was like, wait, you're wearing a house on your wrist? How insane could you be? And I really felt that way. Thank God I never preached that, but I had that instinct as well. Until I said, wait a second, if somebody's crazy enough to spend $1 million on a watch, that means that's his whole life. This is what's important to him. So what's better than complimenting on him? You're touching his most soft spot, the thing that's most important to him. I think it's insane. Okay, so I have a problem. I don't understand why it's worth putting $1 million in your wrist. Who's the problems by him? Maybe the problems by me. And that's why the Gemara says when somebody else makes a mekach, makes an acquisition, you have to compliment them, even if you think it's ugly. You're allowed to lie. Ad kidei kach. You're allowed to change the truth. You could think what that person bought is ugly, and anyway, wow, what a gorgeous. Because if they spent money on it, then to them it was important. If to them it was important, part of Ahavat Yisrael dictates that you show that to you it's important as well. These are all big yisodot that come before talking about Parashat Bereshit. Normally Bereshit's the parasha that there's most books and pages written on, right? Because the first parasha everybody has to prepare something to say. I think that the Cheretz Kadmala Torah, Chazal say. First we have to learn how to be people, then we'll start teaching the Parashiyot. And the first thing is to be a mensch. And a mensch is to be somebody who sees positive, who speaks positive, who preaches positive, who loves people unconditionally, despite disagreeing with them. I disagree with a very big percentage of society. I think it was very clear tonight. Strongly disagree. Publicly vocalize it as well. But I still respect them. I still love them. One has nothing to do with the other. You can think that the other person is absurd as could be. That when they fill out their gender forms, they forgot that there's only male chromosomes and female chromosomes. You can think they're totally insane. And still respect them as a human. They're still a human. Makes no difference. And that's hard to understand sometimes. We right away get our personal beliefs, and some of them are actually spiritual beliefs that come from very grounded places and very healthy places. And we let that interfere with our interaction with people. And that's not what God wants. Obviously we're not talking about violating any halakha. Within the context of halakha, we have to learn to accept. We have to learn to understand. I will tell you an experience that I had this evening. I was on my way here, and I stopped in a gas station. I needed gas and Red Bull and whatever, and I went into a gas station. And I go on online, and there was like one person ahead of me, and I was next. And then there were a few people behind me. And I don't know, sometimes there's like miraculous kfitzat derech. Somebody, today you can't title people by their nationality or skin color or whatever, so we'll just leave it blank, you fill in the blank. Somebody of a gender, of a race that thinks that they should be awarded or something, had an issue with the fact that my car is white and my skin is white, and decided to cut me on the line and say some nasty things. And I have a sharp tongue. It's no big deal for me to send that person back a few years in history. But I said, for what? I smiled to the person and I said, you must be having such a hard day. Let me pay for your things. The guy turns around, stares me in the face, and says, are you insane, bro? I said, your brother, I don't know if I am. But insane? I don't know. Could be now. What do you care? You got free food. I said, free food everybody takes. He's like, but I just gave you a piece of my mind. He said, no, you didn't give me a piece of your mind. You gave me a piece of your frustration because you're having a hard day and you needed somebody to let it on to. And I'm happy to be people's punching bag. If that's what makes you feel better, I can handle it. No big deal. And then he looks at me and he says, are you Christian? I said, you don't see this, man? You got it all wrong. It's big, it's right on top. It's pretty hard to miss. He said, I don't know what that thing is. I said, you live in Jersey, you don't know what that thing is? Come on. Here's a crash course. Those who wear ugly big chains with crosses on the bottom, try to play that they're Christian. Because real Christians don't have to make it like huge. Those who wear these, we're Jewish. I said, and by the way, people of your nationality, many of them are Jewish too. They're from the 10 lost tribes. Suddenly he's my best friend. He's standing outside wasting my time. I barely got here on time. He wants to know who are the tribes and is he from them or not. He's starting to tell me. I already know who his mother is and where his grandmother used to go on Sundays and the food he likes and what he's doing for Thanksgiving. I know everything about his life. I was even invited to Thanksgiving dinner by him. Unbelievable. Wanted my phone number. I gave it to him. The whole deal. This was a split of a second decision. I could have fired right back at him. The store owner already started firing back at him. Hey, don't talk like that and don't cut people online. I said, for what? Poor guy. He doesn't mean bad. He's just having a bad day. That's all it is. And sadly, some people don't have bad days. They have a bad life, period. Politicians, primarily. They were born miserable. They let their misery out for many years, as long as they're in Senate or in Congress or wherever they are. I don't blame them. I pity them, quite frankly. I think maybe we should make a Yom Tefillah. In Israel, for sure we should do that. When you see a guy with 6 seats in a parliament calling himself the prime minister and the whole world laughing at him, you shouldn't be upset. I don't understand why people are upset. I think on the contrary, we should really pity him and there should be national days of prayer, the Fuach Shlema for Naftali Bennett. Poor guy, he's not well and Hashem should help. He should get better one day. It's very sad. And the same thing with everybody. And by the way, people, for years, people have been trying to achieve some version of global peace. I don't believe we'll ever get there because Torah says it won't happen until Mashiach comes. But if we'll get anything closer to it, it's not going to happen from bombs. I'm going to tell you what I witnessed in my own eyes. There was a street in Jerusalem that was called Chov Bar Ilan. It still exists. It's a main throughway, cuts through Jerusalem. And there was primarily Orthodox Jews lived on both sides of the street. Of course, they wanted the street closed on Shabbat. The secular Jews, this was very convenient for them to be able to drive because this cut through Jerusalem. It was before there were other streets like Begin today that also cut through Jerusalem. And the argument started, should it be open on Shabbat or not? And this is what went on for week after week after week after week. In the afternoon, some Hasidic Jews would come out and protest and scream Shabbos and throw rocks and I don't know what and this and that. And these other guys would get out of their cars and fight back. End with a few arrests every week and a few wounded. This went on for years. Literally years. My grandparents, Alayhim Shalom, used to live a few blocks away, so I used to witness this. Until one day, one Hasidic Jew said, enough of this nonsense. Let's try something else. It took him a lot of educating and convincing. This didn't come easy. But he succeeded to convince a couple of thousand people to come Shabbat afternoon to Rehov Bar Ilan, but instead of screaming and throwing rocks and doing protesting in violent ways, to sing Shabbat songs and hired catering to build big tents on Friday afternoon on the sidewalks to give out free Shabbat food. 2 weeks later, there was already a law that during the hours of prayers in the afternoon and this and that, the street should be closed. What they didn't accomplish with all the fights and all the yelling and all of that, with a drop of love, boom, problem solved. Unbelievable. One of my closest critics, and I say that in a good way, meaning we love each other dearly, is a guy who many years ago was very far from Torah and Mitzvot. Today he's a very, very known, prestigious Talmid Chacham. He listens to me every week, and then he sends me an email somewhere between Saturday night and Monday, depending how busy he is, with what he didn't agree with what I said that week. And I send him back an answer, don't worry. And if not, and when I think, when we conclude that he's right, I also correct myself the next week. That's why once in a while you hear some corrections. This guy many years ago wasn't such a Talmid Chacham. In 1996, I was hired by an Israeli political party to run an election campaign. But on the youth end, a youth movement of an Israeli political party. And amongst the many activities that were taking place, this was a very heated election. It was Benjamin Netanyahu against Shimon Peres right after the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, so emotions were very high in Israel. And I was on the right side, we'll call it, but it was the wrong side because, the left had the power then. If you were anybody who believed in right-wing ideals, you were a bit labeled right away a murderer and everything else. And nobody thought, at least naturally, that Netanyahu will be prime minister. Thank God he was at the end, but that's a story for a different time. But amongst the pre-election activities, one of the things that went on were public debates. And one night, there was supposed to be a public debate in one of the universities in Tel Aviv, the University of Tel Aviv, it's called actually. And there were going to be representatives, youth representatives, of all the political movements, of all the different parties that were running in that election. Everybody knew emotions are going to run high. The Haredi parties, the ultra-Orthodox parties, opted not to send representatives, because anyway, they're not getting votes from those type of crowds, and they knew they'd be attacked for all different things. They didn't want to deal with it, so they opted out. Most of the Arab parties, except for one, also opted out. I was working for the regular Likud party, and I didn't think I'd be the one nominated. I wasn't in the public speaking business at that point. But for some reason, they decided to put me on stage. I think they thought that it's doomed in advance because this is going to be an emotional debate, not an intellectual one. And at least if they put me, they could throw me under the bus, young American kid. We made a mistake for sending him, but if they send one of the big top guns, they're in trouble. I went. It was one of the most fun hour and a half of my life. I got on the stage, a bunch of guys, roughly 3 to 5 years older than me, all looking at me with intimidating eyes and claws, like we're going to eat this guy alive. And there was some sort of discussion prior, who's going to get the opening statement, who's going to get the closing statement, who's going to get this, and my response to everything was, I don't care. Whatever you guys are good with, I'm good. And this annoyed them, but I heard them talking between themselves. He's so clueless on debates that he doesn't even understand that he's supposed to care about these things. Knew they hear this going on. I'm going along with it, staying quiet. They ended up deciding to give me the opening remarks. In politics, we know that opening remarks is the worst thing to have. You can only fail at that. There's no way to do any good. It's the last impression that lasts, and the closing remarks are the most valuable. So when it came, I was first, not my turn. My opening remarks were, I have a lot of colleagues over here that look really riled up. Seems like emotions are high. I can feel the tension in the air. Tonight's going to be a really pleasant night, definitely for me, because what all of you don't know is one little secret. Many of you think and prepare and bring notes and do this and do that and are camera shy and everything else, and definitely debate shy. I have one character trait that's very weird. I love the limelight. I love debating. I love the cameras. I love the media reports, whether they're good or bad. No press is bad press. And as soon as I walked onto the stage, the more venom I saw in your eyes, the more I came alive. Thank you for making me feel more alive than I ever was in all the years I'm on this earth. That was my opening statement. Apolitical, nothing to do with politics, straight to the point. And now let's do it. And this went on for a while. There was a representative there. There's the rabbi today. Then he was very far from that, who was part of this, and he belonged to a party called Meretz, which their only agenda practically is anti-Jewish and religious. Obviously, I was his number one target because I was wearing a kippah. A lot went on. Problem is, everything he said I had an answer for. Not I had, God gave me. And things didn't work out as he planned. Now, when you have live audiences and they're young college students, after a while, even if they're not on your side ideology, in their ideology, they like you for having the sharp line or the good punch. So you get the louder applause in the crowd. And the other guy doesn't feel so happy about it, or the other girl, whatever, same thing. An hour and a half went by, the thing was over. It can be argued who won, but that will still be written one day when there's a book coming out soon about that elections. And I walk out. I walk out to my car. I had a driver waiting for me. And I'm about to open the door of my car, and I see this guy from the Meretz party, who was tangling with me most of the time, walking right up to me. I knew this can maybe not end good. My only consolation was that the driver that was hired to take me around was also a trained military personnel who was armed, so I was hoping his eyes were open and he was watching what was going on. And as I'm getting closer to the car, this guy's running after me. Martial arts wasn't my specialty back then, that's for sure. And I wasn't armed either. I said, it is what it is. Let's see what the guy has to do for him. Surprisingly, he didn't come with violence. He just came with, I don't know, today they would call it, I guess, evading your private space, maybe. Came up really close to me, and he spat at me. And he had a good target, too. In the COVID days, you could be tried for attempted murder or something for doing that. But, this was pre-COVID. We're talking about the 90s. Now, what's the human instinct when somebody spits at you? You should never experience it, by the way. It's gross. But what would be the human instinct? He might get a little love mark on his face or something. Something within that ream. Maybe a crooked nose for a few years. Roughly, that's... You wouldn't even realize you did it. It would just be a reflex. That's just the human instinct. God bless my grandparents, my parents, my uncles, my aunts. I don't know who it is. I don't know who to give credit to, so I'll just say all of them who raised me well. And my human instinct is actually a little weird. I opened my arms. I hugged him so much. With such a tight hug. I don't think his mother ever gave him such a tight hug in his whole life. I told him, I love you. There's nobody as good as you in this world. And there's tears streaming down his face. And he looks at me and he says, how? How do you have this courage? Where does it come from? He says, I just made fun of you for an hour and a half in public. You didn't break for a second. You stuck your grounds. Oh, I come outside, I spit in your face. Instead of throwing a punch, you throw a hug? He says, where? Why? How? Explain me. I said, nothing. There's just one technical difference between us. It's the only thing that's going on here. He said, what's that? I said, I believe that you're my brother. And when my brother runs far away, I don't push him further. I do everything in my power to bring him closer. You believe I'm your enemy. So you do whatever you can to push me farther. That's the only difference between us. So the more you spit at me and spit on me and talk bad about me, the more I love you. Because that's the only way I'll ever bring you back. The guy was in shock. He paused. This was the beginning of the cell phone era. I still remember the phone I had back then. It was called a banana in Israel. It was this big white contraption that you would hold. He asked me for my number. Back then we didn't give out numbers freely because phone calls were very expensive. But I gave it to him. And we kept in touch. And 3 years later, he notifies me out of nowhere that he left college and he went to yeshiva. Today he's one of the famous poskim in Israel. Famous poskim in Israel. Big Adam Gadol. From an advocate for the Meretz party to Talmid Chacham. And I always, every time I get an email from this rabbi, or a message, or a phone call, or whatever it is, I always think to myself, imagine that day I would have acted on impulse. And God forbid, I never did this in my life, but thrown a punch back. Or not even that. Just said something stupid. But come on, get a life. That's the way to behave. Basic ethics. Well, he would have been gone. Soul lost forever. Nothing comes out of that. And that's why we've got to change our approach. And there's not much time left. I think Gemara says, I said this before, Shana, I'll repeat it week after week because I wanted to drill into people's heads. Bashishit kolot, and a year that in the sixth year, meaning the 6th year of the 7 years of Shemitah, there's a lot of voices. That means there's a lot of controversy in the world. Bashvit milchamot, the 7th year wars. Motzei Shvit ben David ba. Motzei Shemitah, Mashiach comes. That means that probably we already experienced our last Rosh Hashanah, Kippur, and Sukkot, that we will before Mashiach comes. So now the Yetzer Hara is trying his last effort to make a few people get lost. And he's spewing hate and venom and negativity. And so many Jewish boys and girls get lost as a result of it. And it's dafka now is our job to stick to the opposite extreme. To be Rabbi Yitzchak Berditchev plus. To take everything that he stood for. And to be the biggest Melamdei Zchut and the biggest Ohavei Israel in history. To the extreme. Literally to the extreme. And to do the greatest acts of kindness that there are. The dafka to make an impact, to show that there's a difference. I'll end off with another story based on this theme. This wasn't my idea. I learned this idea from some book that I read that was written by a man or a rabbi. I'm not sure what his title is, so forgive me. In Israel, his name is Dan Tiomkin, and Rabbi Uri Zohar strongly endorses him as an educator. So I bought his book when it came out. It's called Boser HaNeurim. It's only in Hebrew, but it's a phenomenal book. And I got the idea from him. I was in an interesting situation. I went to give a shiur one day, Israeli boys, or children of Israeli parents, whatever, but they were raised Israeli style, even though they live here. And I come to the shiur, and they're all, let's say, between the age of 17 and 22 or 23. They live in the state of New Jersey. In New Jersey, marijuana is legal now for recreational purposes. And they're outside the synagogue that I'm supposed to speak in, smoking joints. And they see me, and they still have some sort of old Sephardic, upbringing, I guess, in them. And somebody says, that's the rabbi who's speaking. And the kids, I see them taking their joints out of their mouth and about to throw them on the floor out of respect. Now up to here, I think if I would say the story, they would say, wow, so beautiful to hear that there's still people like that today, right? I'm going to tell you something that in my opinion is a lot more beautiful. I shrieked on the top of my lungs, stop! They didn't know what they were. I said, don't throw your joints out, are you crazy? And they're looking at me like I fell out of who knows where. I was like, I don't know what those things cost, but if I had to guess, that's 10, 20 bucks a pop. There's 20 of you here, that's 400 bucks. What a waste of money. Do what you got to do. I'll be waiting inside. When you're ready, come in. I was supposed to speak for 45 minutes. The person who brought me to speak told me, if they last half an hour, we give you whatever in the world you want. They never lasted more than 10 minutes. I was 4 hours and 45 minutes in. Dying, no throat, no feet, my body falling apart on me. They wouldn't let me leave. And every time I wanted to leave, it would always go back to the same thing. But wait, you're one of us, you understand us, you care about us, you respect us for who we are. Why would we let you go? Nobody ever did that before. Now again, I don't know if this is right or wrong, you can argue it. I got this idea from this gentleman's book, which I thought was brilliant. But it has to be real, not fake. I actually meant it. I don't justify what they're doing. It's none of my business. I'm not here to give the marijuana argument. That could be done some other day if you want, on a scientific level only, not a Jewish level. From a Jewish perspective, it's wrong, period. For a very simple reason, it destroys brain cells, and anything that destroys brain cells is wrong. But if God gave you a brain, don't ruin it. But, from the medical argument, we can have that some other day. But imagine, I would have been like, who knows how many other people that came to talk to them before. I was like, come on, guys. And even not negative. You could do better. Yeah. The same 20 minutes of the past 40 weeks of people that went there. And out the window, gone, like nothing ever happened. Meaning sometimes you got to think past. You got to be sometimes creative. People make it very hard to judge them favorably these days. It used to be a lot easier. Today people really put you up to a challenge. But take it as your life's challenge. There was all different challenges in recent years. That stupid ice water bucket thing, and every time there's another one of these dare crazes in the society. So why don't we start a movement of a dare thing, you see somebody doing something that's so absurd, instead of saying, what a nutcase, try to find something good in it. Try to see something positive in it. And if not that, at least try to understand, maybe he's just down on his luck that day. Or maybe he's down emotionally that day. And his judgment is just off. And that's all that's wrong. And being that people like Sgulot, I'm starting to concede to this, I can't believe it. After making fun of Sgulot for so many years, oh my God. And so I'll give you one. I don't know if this works, doesn't, I don't know. The person who told me is a huge Talmid Chacham. I have great respect for him. He called me, I was literally parked outside. There's somebody here, or 3 people here that can witness that this is true. I was sitting in the car talking on the phone, they saw me. And I was talking to this rabbi. And he called me, he doesn't live here, he lives in the United Kingdom. And he called me to tell me that he wants me to share this skula by my speech tonight. So I promised him I'd do it, so I'm fulfilling a promise. He said that that he had an experience. Now I'm not saying his name, because of the story you'll understand that I don't know if it's appropriate to say his name. His son was a little bit older, we'll say. And when I say a little bit older, I don't mean 25, that's a baby. He already crossed the 4-0. I was single, never got married. In the Hasidic world, to be 19 and not married is already like 200 by us. But, maybe Bukharians and Hasidim have something in common with that. But most of the world. But 40 in the Hasidim, not to be married, that's... The funny thing is, there was no reason. On paper, everything was perfect. His father's Talmid Chacham, my family is comfortable financially as well. He's a good-looking kid, he's well-learned. Everything about him's good. And even at the age of 40, he stayed normal, he didn't do stupid things. We're talking about has an immaculate reputation. Something ain't going. Not working. And his father said that he heard last year before on Sukkot, when he was in shul, from one of his students, a zgula. So again, I take no responsibility. I was told to repeat, so I'm saying. But it doesn't surprise me, by the way. That on the night of the, it doesn't have to be the night, the day, whatever, on Chafei, on the day of the Badichev's Yortzeit, to read a Sefer Tehillim for whatever it is. In his case, they told it to him because of his son, for his son to get engaged. And then when he's done, to light a candle, Lilu Nishmat of Yitzchak ben Sasha mi Badicheva, the Badicheva, to take a piece of paper to write his one request, meaning that his son should get engaged, and to stick it into the Sefer Dushat Levi, and leave it there, and not tell anybody about it, forget about it. And he told me on the phone tonight that under 2 months later, his son was engaged, and Bliana, his son is married, and his wife's pregnant on top of it, all within a year. That's pretty fast pace over there. Unbelievable. He said, I'm begging you, there's so many people who need different yeshuot, have different problems, have different things, this, that. Share this thing with them. I told him, listen, to tell people to read a Sefer Tehillim is a pretty big ask, especially when it's a Friday. So I'll repeat it, but understand that I don't know how possible this is. But he asked me, so I'm repeating it. When the schut of the tzaddikim that we mentioned, and all the tzaddikim, of course, but definitely those, it says in Chazal that on the day of a tzaddik's hilulah, in Shamayim the posek halacha kmotam, I believe Yitzchak only saw good in Jews. So in Shamayim today, they only see good in Jews. That's why there's a koach tefillah today that I don't know if there is any other day of the year. Because when you only see good, so normally your prayer can get stopped along the way when it's going up. But if there's only good, so it can't get stopped. It goes straight up. There's nothing to stop it. Everything is held up in a good way. Everything's open. It's more than Neilah could be even a day like this. In Shamayim, every prayer that would have gotten stuck, I believe Yitzchak today takes it in because he finds the limud zchut, why this prayer should go in. It's a big day. You should utilize the day for Torah, for mitzvot, for maasim tovim, and most of all for being the eternal optimist and seeing only good, loving people, loving life, loving society, putting a big smile on our face and other people's faces. Smile is a crooked line that straightens out many problems. And we should really make an impact on the world and make the world a better place forever and ever. Amen v'amen.